evening and welcome to Public Space Sri Lanka. On the 8th of November, the people of the United States will be voting to elect a new president. This is an election that will have far-reaching implications for the United States, for the world, and also for Sri Lanka. I mean, this is definitely going to be the most important American presidential election after the Second World War. We have in the studio tonight a personality who needs no introduction, Dr. Dayan Jayatilleka, to discuss the implications of this election and the impact that it will have on Sri Lanka. If we start off then with your assessment of the two candidates, starting with Hillary. Where do the two candidates stand? I mean, as say American presidential candidates, if you look back at other presidential elections, how do these two candidates fare?
Well, Hillary is almost a textbook candidate. It's as if she was born to be candidate. You have her background. She and Michelle Obama, interestingly, have the same kind of academic background. The academic performance was actually better than their president husbands. I mean, both husbands are very clever people, but in academic terms, both Hillary and Michelle scored better as undergrads. Their background is law. And Hillary has been around the block several times, not only as a first lady, but as a first lady she tried to push health care, failed. Then after the Clinton presidency, Bill Clinton presidency was over, she was a senator. Then she ran for the presidency in 2008 but lost to Barack Obama in the primaries, though she was ahead at one point, but Obama did better and he won. Then she was Secretary of State, then she resigned, and when she resigned it was very clear that she was going to contest, because one of my colleagues, my counterpart, my American counterpart at UNESCO in Paris, Ambassador David Killian, who was also, like me, not from the Foreign Service, he was from an academic background. He was already thinking of moving out and joining the Hillary campaign because everybody knew there would be a Hillary Clinton run for the presidency. Then she had a serious health problem, and there was some brain surgery because there was a tumor. But she made a huge comeback. So she's a very determined woman with a lot of experience, and she's very much in the mainstream of liberal hawkish. I mean, she's not a liberal dove, she's a liberal, but she's also hawkish, kind of a liberal hawkish candidacy on foreign policy issues, liberal to progressive on domestic issues. Now we've seen this kind of mix, John F. Kennedy being one. So it's very much in the American Democratic Party political culture and political tradition. That's Hillary. Donald Trump is, of course, an outlier. You have this kind of phenomena in US politics, a populist, you're populist of the right and populist of the left. Donald Trump was a populist of the right. He is, in a way, though his candidacy is new, the forces that support him are not all that new. We've all heard of the Tea Party movement. And the question here is whether the Republican Party has come out of what looked like the trap it was in from 2008, where the grassroots activists are a radical populist state of mind, but the national electorate is at the center. So the Republican Party in 2008 with the Sarah Palin vice presidency, and then again 2011 Romney, and now the Republican Party seems to be responding to its grassroots activists, what used to be called the Tea Party movement. and Trump is riding that wave. But that's a big gamble. Is it a phenomenon whose time has come? And I'm not talking about Trump, but I'm talking about this evangelical populist right in US politics, or does it remain really a very large fringe phenomenon which has captured the Republican Party and made it unelectable because the national electorate is actually far more at the center than the Republican Party. Now that's what remains to be seen. Trump is a very colorful personality. He's a maverick, and he seems to be doing something very, very interesting. That is, he's mixing rhetoric of the right and the left.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a very interesting mix. You have Democratic candidates who have mixed hawkishness on foreign policy, as Hillary does, with kind of a leftish rhetoric on domestic policy. Now, that's a well-known phenomenon. But what Trump is doing is less well-known. He's taking, in a way, a peacenik stand in external affairs, but a kind of a robust evangelical right-wing populist stand on domestic affairs. It's a contest between two mixers. These are two ideological mixers, fusions.
Yeah.
And let's see what happens.
Yeah. Would you sort of say that there is some sort of a superficial resemblance to the era of Franklin Delano Roosevelt? I mean, he was also isolationist when it came to foreign policy, at least at the original stages. And he concentrated on domestic issues. Now, likewise, isn't America really in a rut today, which sort of warrants that kind of approach, the Roosevelt kind of approach?
Well, it does, but I don't see either of the candidates as Rooseveltian, and if there was one of the two who would be even slightly Rooseveltian, I suppose Hillary would say that it's her, because she's much more likely to have a New Deal type of policy in domestic affairs, and Roosevelt, as we know, did lead America into the war, quite rightly at that time, against Nazism.
Yeah, having tried to avoid getting involved,
yes,
he was drawn into it.
He tried. But America is in crisis. Now, the two candidates are responding to that crisis in two entirely different ways. That crisis itself has at least two dimensions. One is a domestic dimension, and you would see that in terms of the police shootings, the shootings at the police, that's the most dramatic. And earlier, the school shootings, people have forgotten.
That's right.
The school massacres. So something is happening in American society. And both these candidates are trying to respond to that. Then the United States is in trouble in the international arena, where it sees China on the ascendancy. The US is still the leading power, but it sees the gap being closed. It sees Russia and China drawing together once again. So the US sees Syria as a kind of a flashpoint. But there's a huge division in the United States as to whether the main threat is ISIS, jihadism, and whether in order to combat that threat, it is necessary to sink one's differences even with Russia, or whether it is desirable and possible to fight on two fronts, to fight ISIS, but also to face down Russia, to fight against and overthrow Assad. Now, the US is confused. I have never seen this kind of confusion in the United States in my politically conscious lifetime. And they say that in the 20th century, everybody remembers where they were when they heard about the death of John F. Kennedy. Now, I remember where I was, so that's true as a boy. So I've been conscious of American politics at least from the assassination of President Kennedy. And I've not seen anything like this because you have a complete scrambling of positions. Now, usually, as you know, the guys who say, or the girls who say that, well, we should have better relations with Russia and we should concentrate on terrorism as the main enemy, are on the democratic side of the equation. They are the moderates.
That's right.
But here, I mean, it's the Republicans who usually say, no, 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 you know, the Russians are as bad as the terrorists and so on. But here, it's a complete flip-flop. Donald Trump, who's a Republican candidate, says, hey, wouldn't it be great if we can get together with the Russians and flatten ISIS?
That's right.
And it's Hillary who's saying the opposite, who's accusing a Republican. Now, that's never happened in my lifetime, where a Democratic candidate accuses the Republican candidate of being a puppet of the Russian president. So
it's a bizarre situation.
It's absolutely zany. It's straight out of Mad Magazine. This mix, the role flip flop.
Yeah, even with regard to Syria, then isn't it the case that Donald Trump seems to be very clear in his mind as to what he's going to do? But in the case of, say, Hillary Clinton, now she can't really answer that allegation that is always thrown at her by Trump, saying that you don't know who you are arming in Syria. There is no answer to that question, but they're still going ahead.
Yes.
How would you? I mean, why has the American establishment, the intelligence, armed and the armed forces, why have they allowed such a situation to prevail?
Well, you know, the answer has something which tangentially encompasses Sri Lanka as well. Now, I know there are people in the Sri Lankan establishment at that time who were wondering, why are the Americans critical of us? I mean, we are fighting terrorism. We are all supposed to be fighting terrorism. Now, the reason is that there was a paradigm shift in the United States after the Cold War ended. Because until then, liberal opinion, by which I mean liberal hawkish opinion as well, had a fairly clear notion that they would push back against the Russians, but they wanted to negotiate with the Russians and weave them into a stable structure. Now, Dr. Henry Kissinger was a very good example of this. I mean, he's still around, but he's nowhere as influential as he was. So, the paradigm at that time was that states are preferable to terrorist movements. Of course, if the states are inimical, we will do something about it. We will maybe change the regime, but we are not against states. In fact, we are against left-wing guerrillas who are trying to topple states.
Yeah.
So this was the paradigm. But somewhere along the line, this changed. And there was a departure from the axiomatic notions of World War II. Now, in World War II, as we remember, the United States under President Roosevelt and Britain under Churchill sank their ideological differences with the Soviet Union, which was under Stalin. And they said, look, we've got this Nazi fascist threat, and we are going to sink our differences temporarily and join together in a grand alliance and fight this dangerous, aggressive usurper. Now, that was the paradigm of the Second World War, which then, of course, became the Cold War, but still, there was a very clear notion of how the game should be played. But that changed somewhere in the 90s. And the United States got very greedy. That's if I'm being unkind. If I'm being kind, I would say the United States got very confused. And it thought that, well, you know, we can take on terrorist movements as well as states that we don't like. And in fact, if there are some terrorist movements that we like, then we are not going to do anything about them. We can differentiate between the ones we like and the ones we don't like. And as far as states go, well, if we don't like the guy in charge, we will destroy the state if we have to. They didn't figure that those states had held down far more dangerous enemies such as ethnic and religious terrorism. So, the US became, in a funny way, in a very demented way, very radical, because they forgot what the state was supposed to do, the Hobbesian notion of the state which would safeguard society from anarchy. They went on an anti-state campaign as well, rolling back the state, considering the state to be an enemy, except for their own state, of course.
Yes.
And we got caught up, Sri Lanka got caught up in that. So, okay, you can fight the tigers, but you know, you should stop, don't finish the job. And you saw this in many other parts of the world. So now what you have concerning Syria is a very bizarre situation, because what Donald Trump is saying, whether he knows it or not, and it's possible he doesn't, is the same thing that a liberal progressive Democrat such as Roosevelt was saying at that time. That is, look, there is a very serious enemy of a very unorthodox sort, that's fascism, which was a movement. And it has captured state power, it now has a territory. So we must get together even with our old enemies, the Soviet Union, and crush this. Now Trump is saying, let's get together with the Russians and fight these terrorists. Can't you see these guys are attacking in France, shooting up places, or people inspired by them are shooting up nightclubs in Florida. What's wrong with us? And he's saying it as the right-wing candidate, which is not usually the case.
Absolutely.
But the candidate who represents the liberal wing of the Democratic Party, who should be arguing in favor of a dialogue with Russia and narrowing the front to a battle against terrorism, is actually doing the opposite and saying, you know, we should take down Assad, we should tell the Russians where they get off, we should fight the ISIS. So that's not just Hillary Clinton. That is the confused state of liberal Western policy today, and it's not just liberal, because even David Cameron has the same view.
Absolutely.
It's a shift in
No,
Western opinion.
that entire conservative bloc,
Yeah.
or rather David Cameron was in the conservative
Yeah.
bloc, but there is a unholy kind of widespread confusion both within the conservative bloc as well as the liberals.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a new convergence. It started really during the Clinton and Tony Blair administrations, which were supposedly center-left.
Yeah, sure.
Madeleine Albright was the foreign secretary at that time. So it started with not with the first Gulf War, because the first Gulf War was to kick Saddam Hussein out of Kuwait. But it started with Yugoslavia, 1999, the NATO bombing of Yugoslavia. And then with the second Gulf War, which was the invasion of Iraq. So it's been going on, it's been bipartisan. It started with the Democrats. It was picked up and taken to ridiculous extremes by George Bush.
Absolutely.
President Obama tried to extricate himself from this, so he hit the brakes. But even on his watch, it is well known, because it was all on television, that President Obama and Secretary of Defense Bob Gates were against American military involvement in Libya. But it was a trio of ladies of very hawkish views, but within the liberal camp, who pushed Obama and the US into that conflict, and that's Hillary Clinton, Susan Rice, and Samantha Power. The same ones who took a position which was not very friendly towards Sri Lanka.
Yeah, we'll be taking a short break. Stay with us.